Hi, and welcome to CMO Journeys, where we sit down with the marketing leaders shaping some of today's most innovative brands. I'm Christian Banach, and I explore the stories behind the CMOs, how they lead, how they grow, and how they think about partnering with agencies. Today's guest is Kimberly Corbett, Chief Marketing Officer at Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy is a fast-growing sports gaming company that blends daily fantasy, pick'em games, sports betting, and original sports media into one platform. While it might not be a household name yet, it is already a unicorn valued at over $1.3 billion and competing in a space dominated by the giants like DraftKings and FanDuel. Kimberly, welcome to CMO Journeys.
Awesome to be here today. And you have a great name. That's my son's name is Christian. So
Good. He's a good man. He's a good man.
Yeah.
Excellent. So you are about 6 months into the role at Underdog. What has been the most surprising or maybe energizing thing that you've learned so far about the business or the fan base?
About the business, I would say the talent density that Underdog has, it is just an incredible group of people that they are so bright and smart and aggressive. And it was just like this total energy kicker for me to get in there. Demands my best every day, which I love. And in terms of the customer base, I thought I knew fandoms or I thought I knew like communities coming from video games. And I've worked on some of the biggest IPs in the world, like Marvel, Game of Thrones. But sports fans, it is so ingrained in their identity that it's really cool to be a CMO in this space and kind of honor that. And what makes sense and how you speak to these consumers is just, I would say, even more intense than in video games and more important because your place in their lives is around something that has so much meaning for them.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I'm definitely going to want to come back to the fan base a little bit later. But I'd love to start a little bit more about your journey and how you got to where you're at. If you think of your career as a series of chapters, from what I understand, you started in accounting and then auditing. Then you moved into performance marketing, video games, as you had mentioned, now fantasy. What do you think might be the through line that's really connecting all those chapters?
I think it actually goes before my first corporate job and where I grew up, which was in an extremely rural community in Eastern Oregon. It was a farming and ranching community. And the through line that I see is really like hustle and hard work. That was so part of the culture that I grew up in. I worked from the time I was young, that it gave me confidence in any scenario that I could out hustle almost anybody. Like I knew I could work hard and figure things out. And when I think about accounting and all of that, like, at the end of the day, I didn't love it. And I think when you don't love something, you're not very good at it usually either. And I say this because I think there should be no shame in like trying things, and especially when you're young. And if you're not super into it and not successful right away, that doesn't mean that you can't hit the pause button and go explore and figure out what it is that makes you great and gets you to jump out of bed in the morning and be excited.
Sure, sure. Now you said, you didn't love it, but talk about the transition to marketing. How did you find marketing?
I love that. It's a pretty interesting story, actually, at least I think. So I was an auditor. Did that right out of college up in Oregon. And I had this like quarter life crisis in my early 20s where I quit. And to my parents' horror, went and nannied for a year. Like imagine your kid goes to school, gets this accounting degree, and they're like, hey, they're working at like an amazing firm. They're a bank auditor. And they're like, you know what? I'm going to go be a nanny. And when the kids were at school, I actually volunteered at a nonprofit. And at the time, Google Grants, they gave like $10,000 a month for nonprofits to use. And I just taught myself search engine marketing and then search engine optimization. And I only nannied for about a year and then transitioned into doing digital marketing. Really similar, though. I've always loved quantitative things. I've always loved finance, economics, all of that. And this is when digital is blowing up. So I would say those skill sets were very similar and actually a competitive advantage, especially in my future, understanding how marketing investments flow through to a P&L. What that means for a company, I think has made me more successful in my jobs for sure.
Yeah, I love that. So the marketing nanny, I love it. I love it.
A long time ago, 20
Yeah,
years ago. Yeah.
sure, sure. So you've made another big leap as well. You went from video games now to fantasy sports and then sports gaming. What kind of has felt familiar about that move? What has also maybe made you create some new muscles to build?
I think at the end of the day, it's software and applications. So with consumers that are making transactions in that application. So like when you think of the business model, it's the distribution is pretty similar. And then you've got like some of the nuts and bolts are similar. With that said, I think that, I got a little bit into the fan bases and how they're different. Sports is always on. Sports is a different consumer. There's some crossover with video games, but how and when you're talking to them is just so different. And so for me, the new muscle that's been super exciting to build is really digging in on what brand means in this space. It's super competitive. And I think in any of those environments, how you're differentiating and how you're showing up for your customers, I think there's real opportunity to actually take some things from video games and start to build really deep relationships, both digitally and in person, that I don't think that industry has really like done well. And so for me, it's like, how do you take some of those things and then apply them in a way that makes sense for this new customer base and product that is a little bit different than what I had done before? It's fun.
Sure, sure. Are you a gamer?
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm like a super core gamer. Like I tend to like more casual games, but I've worked on the gamut from like Words with Friends all the way to Mortal Kombat. So I enjoy games for sure. But I'm also an athlete, and my family is an athlete family and sports family, and we're huge Niners fans and huge Warriors fans. And so for me, it felt like an easy transition. It's what my family talks about around the dinner table. So that's been super fun.
Yeah, I get the sense highly competitive family.
Yes, my husband, he still plays semi-pro basketball. He's 37 and still hoops for the Olympic Club on the national team here in San Francisco. So it's a little bit. He's a patent attorney by day. So yeah, we're a little bit go-getters in that sense.
Yeah, I love that. The marketing nanny, the basketball playing patent attorney. You guys are very eclectic. I like it. Tell me about, so you had roles, as we've kind of talked about at some different companies, Kabam, Zynga, Warner Brother Games. What was maybe an experience there that really changed how you think about scale and audience engagement?
With this question, when you say scale, do you mean like as you get bigger, how you engage with your audience? Is that kind of like the central part? Yeah, for sure. Well, look, I got into mobile games when it was like brand new, and we launched Marvel Contest of Champions, which has made I think 3 billion at this point, and it was scaling almost like it was wild. That I'll never forget that moment. I think anybody involved with that product, because it was a time and a place, probably very similar to how sports gaming felt when that first launched. It was just like this insane moment in time. And I think in those cases, when you have hyper growth, you're sort of thinking about like customer engagement later and just trying to make sure that like the business is on rails and these investments make sense, because it was at the time a bit of a new business model. Over time, though, like I would say more at Warner Brothers Games, when we were working with incredible franchises like Game of Thrones and Mortal Kombat, you have these communities that have been around for sometimes decades. And so I think they're very big known IPs, and how you're engaging with them requires a lot more expertise. I think you have a lot more like digital advocates for your brand at that point. But they also have super high expectations. And so I think sometimes we've learned the hard way that not engaging with your customer base is the wrong thing to do. And I think traditional IPs can be a little more hesitant to really get in there and talk. But if you don't, it can be really detrimental. So again, I think at the beginning it was like, what customer base? What do we do? We're just trying to keep everything on rails. And then it became, okay, how do we like, now that this is big and this is part of people's lives, how are we engaging with them all the
Sure,
time?
sure. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Talk to me a little bit about, someone in your career journey, maybe as a mentor, a teacher, a friend, somebody that really made a big impact on you that you still, remember today.
I love that. Kabam was so important to my career because kind of similar how I said Underdog has this like talent density. Kabam was like that. It was the smartest people I'd ever met, all in one company. And the expectations were crazy high. So my boss at the time, I think I'd been there a year, and I thought I should get promoted because I'd done all this great work. And he turns to me and he says, "What have you done that no one in the industry has done?" I was a manager, marketing manager. And that was the expectation. It was like never been done. And I've taken that with me on all my teams. All my teams know that, MBDs. What I loved about that moment was that it implied I was capable. So it's really interesting when you sort of set this expectation of being great and doing something that changes an industry or a paradigm. People tend to then do that thing and they didn't know they were capable of it, right? And to me, I've had really high performing, awesome teams and people I've worked with at multiple companies. And that framework has stuck with me my whole career.
Yeah, no, I love that. Never been done. What'd you call it? NBDs?
NBDs, and the joke is like NBDs and become no big deal. Never been done's become no big deal.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that. That's great. Well, I loved the background. I'd like to shift gears a bit. We've talked a little bit about Underdog here. It is growing fast. It's operating at a unicorn scale, but at the same time, it feels very much like a challenger brand, right? Curious, now that you've stepped in the role, you're 6 months in, what are some of those top priorities that you're building for that next phase?
I want to make it not a challenger brand and a first choice marquee brand, right? Like we're here to be customers' first choice when they're thinking about what makes sports more fun. And we're at this point with prediction markets and different product offerings where we can truly engage with customers more than we ever had. And so, how do you take the brand into like this, what was kind of transactional space, I think, and then move it into this like sports fandom and showing up for those fans across the whole life cycle of a sports calendar year is really exciting. And then how are we going to differentiate and do that in a way that, again, I don't like to hear like that we're not a household name. We got to be a household name. We have a good brand, and now it needs to be a great first choice brand.
Sure, sure. So as you think about that, how are you balancing then customer acquisition with longer term, brand trust, in a category, that it's unmistakable. You've watched sports, it's over indexing on promotions.
I love that question because it was my first observation when I came to this industry and I did a tear down of ads and what works and competitors. And I'll go back to my comment about being transactional. I don't think promos are transactional in their advertising. I don't think that's a brand. That's not a feeling you get when you think of a company. It's more like, oh, this is something that I get out of them now, and it doesn't build loyalty. It doesn't really speak to what makes sports fun. And promos are certainly important, and you want to show up for your customers and participate in that. But it's my job, again, to build relationships that have more meaning and show up across that sports life cycle that it's just different than transactional.
Now, you guys are in sort of an interesting space, right? Because there's different states have different regulations, and therefore you have different products. Walk us through, how do you, develop a go-to-market strategy, when you have a new state opening up? How do you think about that?
It's really boring and quiet. No, I'm joking. It's pretty, obviously we take these regulations super seriously. And so what that looks like is both our product offering and then what we say and how we communicate to customers depends on the regulatory environment of the state that we're in. And so I think, and that's changing and we have to be on top of that. And so for me, it does start with the customer, right? Like at the end of the day, who is the customer and the geography that we're advertising in? How does that back up against the product that we're able to offer in a given state? And then what's our messaging and budgeting around that? Sort of those core components is what I really think of. And then being ready to change as regulations change, right?
Yeah. How does that differ than when you're doing gaming? Let's go back to that where it is really universal. And this, you have different, programs maybe for different, each individual state. How do you think about, or how do you structure maybe your team or your strategy differently than where you're at in other places?
Well, gaming is global, right? So we were in all countries except for China. And you still had different devices and you actually had, actually different gameplay depending on what device and what country. If you're servicing somebody in Southeast Asia, it's going to look different than like a high-end iOS device in the US. And so I think there's a lot of parallels there. There's also different regulations, different privacy laws globally that mean you can advertise and do things differently by country. So I think the scale in mobile games was actually more complex in that regard because it was more countries and different laws, and some of the ways you market it, it was behind the scenes, again, with like privacy laws and regulations in Europe or different countries. What you were doing from a data perspective differed greatly depending on the geography that you were publishing that game in. And so I think it's same but different, if that makes sense. They're both complex in different ways. And it's just the ability to do that at scale is what matters.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can see that. That's an interesting parallel. So as you build out your team, what are some of the capabilities that you're prioritizing first? Is it, things like insights? Is it growth? Is it brand life cycle? Talk to us about that.
Excuse me. Ultimately, I think when I start any place, it's really understanding measurement, which seems counterintuitive, but I have to see where the breakdowns are in my funnel and where I need to then invest. So sometimes you get at a company and their measurement capabilities aren't great. And so you need to actually like understand what you're looking at, what that means, look at historical trends to see where you need to invest. I do a lot of competitor teardowns too when I get anywhere. Where are they spending? How is that working? What have they been able to do? And I really just lay it out from click through rate to LTV by geo and understand where again are like the code reds. And that's how I decide when to make my investments is kind of based on that. And you can do that pretty quickly, right? And then just getting to know the team and their capabilities. Every company has like rock stars in certain areas and other areas where you need to build up. And that just depends. Again, my focus there depends on what's most impactful for the business. I think this goes back to my more finance background is like, well, I know if I pull these levers first, this is going to flow through to the bottom line most. So I tend to focus there. And it depends on the company and their capital position. Sometimes they're established and super profitable, and they have like a brand goal or things that you would invest more in latent marketing that comes through later, or they have a game launch that's going to happen later, like in your sort of, it's a console launch and you're going to be investing different than you would in like a live service thing that's real time. So it just depends.
Sure. Got it. So looking at your background, you've definitely led some very large teams. And I'm curious now in this role here, how are you making decisions around, what should live and stay internal or where you might want to bring in outside, agency partners that could add leverage? How do you think about that?
I do go back a bit to the like, depends on where the company is at strategically. And I have sort of a framework in how I think about it. First and foremost is like, what's your capital position and how much like fixed and variable costs do you want to have? Because that's going to influence like what I might build out internally. Some marketing capabilities, especially on the automation or tech side, they're non-trivial investments. Also, do I have time? Like, do I need to deliver like today? You're probably not going to spend a year building something there. So maybe a vendor offers that. And then I try to really understand what has to be proprietary. So to me, I'm not going to want to work with a vendor that can turn around and give something that I kind of build bespoke with them to a competitor that's going to make a difference in our business, for sure.
Interesting. So how do you make those how are you making those determinations, here today?
For me, it comes down to capabilities that I need right now and things that are really important to deliver. For instance, like there are things that I'm spinning up now that, again, it has to do with what I think can differentiate us in terms of relationships with the customers that I don't think are like, you know, so like a perfect science that if another vendor used them, it would like ruin it. But they, this vendor might do it better than I'm able to do. There's also a time, right? Better, quicker, and the cost is decent. So again, it's just kind of applying that framework without giving away like the secret sauce of like which vendors and what I'm doing. It's thinking of it through that lens.
You've been vocal about AI, and curious. We've made it actually about 20 minutes in without talking about AI. But how are you thinking about AI at Underdog here today? And what do you see maybe as the biggest upside?
I think the biggest upside is the culture around it. Underdog is at the forefront of adoption in terms of companies that I have access to. And that's really like a philosophical alignment on should you do it. And I mentioned Underdog's amazing culture earlier in terms of just going and getting it. And so for them, AI isn't something that is to be feared. It's like, how can we use this to our advantage and be quicker and have a better cost structure and do more advanced things? They're all over it, which is exciting because I think there is more hesitancy in more artistic endeavors like video games on that application. And certainly public companies and IP holders have some hesitancy around that for sure. And then for me and my organization, the advancements are rather remarkable at this point. It's like, Claude, is it possible for a marketing analyst to maybe start to try and see if they could build an automation flow for their workflow? Like that wasn't really possible a year ago. And then market intel and insights, you have a PhD in your pocket, right? I even use it to think through some complex problems and ask questions that I just want like to play off different scenarios. And it's just incredible. So obviously, I think Underdog, again, at the forefront, great culture around it, and that's going to pay off.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I love that. There's so many possibilities. It's and it changes, I feel like day by day, which is exciting and scary all at the same time, right?
Yeah, there's definitely like, I think some hesitancy to it. But the way that I thought about it early on was like, this is coming like a freight train, regardless of what I think about it. And I think anybody in their career that embraces it is going to be set up better to succeed in any outcome. And that is just going to be important for people to understand. I think sometimes the reaction is hesitancy for worrying about your own job. But the reality is, if you don't know how to use those tools or incorporate them, you're at more risk. So I think just doing that and being ahead of that is really important.
Yeah, definitely. So as you know, we have a large following that listens to this that are agencies, and would love to get some of your perspectives on agencies. You've worked with agencies across your career, gaming, publishing, performance marketing. What do you feel like your best agency partners of the years consistently get right?
To me, it's offering something that, again, is like high capital investment for me in a way that is the price is good enough that I'm not going to even think about doing it myself, and expertise in a domain that that I'm also really knowledgeable in. Like they're offering something that's an advantage versus just something that I don't really care about. And there's been some great agencies and partners that I've worked long term with for that reason, right? Because they're able to do something that, again, like, am I going to really want to go invest in that tech or go invest in their expertise? Like, I've worked with everything from marketing agencies on creative, all the way to staffing agencies, all the way to like people that have spun up technologies and go do those things, to people that do like in person activations. And I think that is really how I look at it.
Yeah, yeah. So when you're evaluating partners, or let's say you were to turn to your personal network, I'm assuming first, and who do I know that could do this? Um, what are you looking for? From like an outside in perspective, like what would make an agency stand out to you as somebody that you might want to talk to?
I think it's not going to be surprising to say that I am not on the like overly fluffy side of CMOs. So for me, I'm really not interested in like someone that doesn't understand my business or understand, even with really cool brand stuff, how that can impact the business and results. Like I want to know, case studies, what they've done, that they've looked at my business and they think they can do something better. Like they notice something is really interesting, like, hey, I noticed you guys are doing this, you could use us. I think we're seeing a lot of this with AI too, like AI vendors that are spinning up where they're like, hey, they know the cost structure, they know, what creative services or whatever costs, and they've figured something out there. Those are actually the only cold call emails I've taken in years. Is I'm like, oh, that is a novel solution. And especially with where AI has been, the past year, like there is a fair amount of prompt engineering and work to do to build that stuff. And so if the cost is decent, yeah, I'm going to be all over that.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned, you've taken some cold calls. What maybe were the thread that, I mean, why did you take those versus others? Like, and how do you evaluate, who to ignore and who maybe to consider?
I don't know that there's like, it's going to differ for every CMO. For me, again, it goes back to like very succinct, like known problem. And then we'll just take creative as one, right? With it, with AI. So that your creative service is teams and vendors have been expensive and these capabilities are building up. Hey, I've solved this, this is the cost kind of like upfront. So I understand like, oh, wow, that seems worthwhile to me. Or we've solved this complex problem. Also, when I see really great campaigns, like I want to know who did them. And so that's another way of getting through to me. Like, hey, did you see this in your industry? Like we did this, which is awesome.
Yeah. Are you following like trade publications like the Ad Weeks and Ad Ages? Is that something that you do follow, or are you just kind of sticking more to your industry? Like, tell me a little bit about your media consumption.
My media consumption tends to mirror the target demographic I'm at. I actually am more interested in understanding native content consumption than I am with like what someone might be wanting me to think from like an ad, like here's where trends are going. Because to me, I think I need to be even at like 2 years ahead of what they're writing about. And so for me, it's about actually following the creators in the space. I pay a lot of attention to what like my husband looks at and is consuming. And then in terms of like what the industry is doing, I tend to look at that through my own competitor intelligence. Like I monitor that weekly, where people are spending money, where it's increasing and decreasing versus like what like an ad week would say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So as you think about like an agency that would potentially want a meeting with, not necessarily you, but a CMO in general, like what do you think that they need to demonstrate upfront in order to get their attention?
Proven track record, success. I love hearing that, things again within a given industry that they're famous for, and how that applies. Like just a little bit of thought on our business. In terms of like cold emails, I love when they bother to take the time and say, hey, I noticed this within your marketing campaigns and we've done this. And are you interested in talking?
Sure, sure. What do you think agencies get wrong when they're trying to get on the radar of marketers like yourself?
I think right now with AI and also just like compressed budgets, it's like being mindful of what that means. Like ultimately, a lot of CMOs are probably going to be pressured for cost right now, I would think. And I think adding to the cost structure is probably, whereas like AI allows you to reduce that cost structure. I think there's still some like old guard agencies that don't really think about that, and that's not going to land well with me personally.
Interesting. Okay, great. So I want to shift gears a bit and ask you a question in terms of like your teams that you've led and across a lot of different industries. What would you say is your leadership signature style today?
I think it goes back to the never been dones and just really orienting around how people can do like it's that culture of like how are we changing the paradigm for our company. And I also believe in people. Like I like to prop them up and give them opportunities. One of the first things I ask new people on my team is, where do you want to be in 10 years? Some people haven't thought of it, but I think that understanding, sometimes they're in a role, they're in a seat on the bus, but it's the wrong seat on the bus. And really understanding where they want to go allows me to give them opportunities that get them to that destination and see if that makes sense. I am not a micromanager, adults only. I get pretty cranky when I have to. So I think it's just expecting like flawless execution from people. And when I don't see that, I think, really digging in on like how they get there is important to me. But, I feel really like I've worked with a ton of top talent in multiple industries, which makes me be at my best. And I'm always inspired by my team. I'm always trying to learn from them too, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Never been done. I love it. Final question then. For someone early in their marketing career, what advice would you give to them?
I would say do something you find fun. I go back to, my like early 20s. If your life is short, if you're going to get up on Monday, try and spend that doing that in an industry or something, or even what you're doing all day that you find fun. And then challenge yourself a bit. I remember interviewing at Kabam and being like, oh my gosh, it was intimidating. And I know when I got the job offer, I was almost a little hesitant because, can I hang? And I think put yourself in rooms with people that you think are smarter than you and do challenging things that you think you can't do or might not be capable of. And that's going to really pay off at the end of the day. If you're loving what you're doing and you're consistently challenging yourself. When I was asked those questions of like where I wanted to be in 10 years earlier in my career, when I was really succeeding and growing, I would just say learning. And so I think just don't get stagnant and continue to put yourself in places where it is a learning environment and you are doing something new.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great way to end the show here, and I think you're testament to that, right? I think there's probably people listening today that are maybe not totally fulfilled in their roles and wondering what's next for them, and look what happened to you. You completely changed paths and careers, and now you're having so much fun and leading this great company. So really appreciated this conversation. Thanks again for the insights, Kimberly. And to everyone watching, don't forget to follow CMO Journeys for more conversations with the marketing leaders that's shaping what's next. I'm Christian Banach. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.